Now that you know everything that you need to know about managing the task of feeding your baby, let's talk a little bit about scheduling and then also sleep time at night, okay, with feedings and getting the most sleep possible, okay? So scheduling is a big topic of discussion when it comes to feeding your baby. And what scheduling means, when people talk about scheduling your baby, it's essentially talking about spreading out their feedings and managing the feeding times so you and your woman can get the most sleep possible and get them on a schedule, okay? So your baby is working around your schedule versus their schedule. Fine. Okay. So a couple of things. Off the bat, you know, I'm not here to say scheduling is right, scheduling is wrong. We're going to talk about scheduling in general, okay? I am here to share with you what I've learned, and my personal perspective is if you do decide to schedule your baby, okay, which we used scheduling, okay? Please, please, please consider not working on putting your baby on a schedule for at least 3 weeks to a month, okay? Your baby is going to be scheduled for the rest of their life, okay? You know, when they first come out, again, they don't have wants, only needs. And, you know, forcing a schedule in the very first couple of weeks, from everything that I've come to understand, it works against building the trust and helping them to, and all of you, transition into being a family and caring and getting the needs met. Look at the local hospitals. I've taught at 3 different hospitals, and I'm here to tell you, we get babies. We've had babies come to the emergency room in the first couple of weeks of life, and the problem is they're starving. The babies are starving. Why? Because folks are really concerned about getting this schedule going, and they're not feeding their babies. You know, I've seen the other side of that. So, you know, I'm not here saying scheduling is wrong in any way. A matter of fact, we're going to talk about scheduling. We scheduled, you know, and giving them the first couple of weeks to really get settled in and connect and trust you, right? And mom, and, you know, the first couple of weeks are just everybody getting used to things and having the baby there. And it's less stressful for your woman. It's less stressful for your little organism baby who, again, recognizing they're not conscious, they're separate yet. So then to force a schedule, I'm hearing again from the back end, you know, of the women who are taking care of the women who have forced a schedule and how miserable they are, a lot of them, because it just doesn't make sense from a being, like a human being organism. It doesn't, at least it doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you to kind of force this schedule right away? I don't think so, right? After they're okay, they're trusting you and they're, you know, your guys are in a groove and you're like, okay, baby, now we're just going to start spreading things out so we can get some more sleep, you know, in a month's time. You know, most healthy, normal, standard issue babies can be sleeping, you know, 5, 6, 7 hours by 3 months. All right. So please, we're going to talk about scheduling. And if you are, a lot of it comes down to our women who maybe they only have a month off, or maybe they have 3 months off, but they're really determined to get the baby on a schedule before the baby has to go to daycare. We get it. We get it. The birth community, we get it. We understand, and I fully understand. You got to go back to work. They want them on a schedule. And just imagine you, dad. You're like, look, baby, I know you got to go back to work, and I know we want to get the baby on the schedule. However, your baby, how about us considering the first month, you know, however, even if she only has a week, giving that time just to be, the baby is on a schedule, right? That little organism that's come out and it's trying to figure things out and start to grow and develop and feel safe and all of it. They're on a schedule, right? No wants, only needs. And really, working on building that trust and taking care of their needs on their time and that first time. It goes so much to build this foundational level of trust. I'm hoping that just makes sense to you, dude to dude. I mean, as a little organism, it just seems to make the most sense, okay? So even if she has to go back to work sooner than she'd like, the more time on just connecting and listening to the baby and doing their needs, they're going to eat about every 2 hours, right? About every 2 hours. Some babies are different, a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. Sometimes they're going to want to cluster feed and they're hungry more often. Although as a general guideline, about every 2 hours. And if you guys can make it and work in your hearts and in your schedule and in your life to give them at least 3 weeks, a month of being on that schedule, it's going to really increase your odds of sleeping better through the night and connecting and laying down this foundation of trust. Okay, so I said my piece with the scheduling thing. Again, we scheduled. It's just giving them a bit of time to transition in instead of forcing something right away. It makes the scheduling even more successful if you guys decide you do want to schedule to spread out the feedings, okay? Okay, so that's essentially the scheduling piece. When you guys do decide to schedule, there's a lot of techniques and perspectives, and that's again a family situation. Ultimately, when you get to the point where you're like, okay, we want to start spreading out the feedings a little bit, it's, they'll wake up, okay, and then you're like, okay, let's give them a few minutes to see if they're going to, go a little bit longer, 5-minute increments, right in between them. Maybe you go, after you've waited 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, maybe, they settle down a little bit and they're like, okay, and they're, they can wait a little bit longer, as they're developmentally, as they get older, they can wait a little bit longer between feedings, right? So with this and with scheduling and with feeding your baby, let's talk about the feeding cues, right? So you got your feeding cue worksheet. So your baby in general, as a general guideline, they're going to wake up hungry. So even without enforcing a serious feeding schedule, there is a little structure that you can lean on that is consistent, that you can use from the day you get your baby, the day your baby's born and comes home with you, okay? And that is eat, activity, sleep. Okay, so as a general guideline, not meaning your woman can never, breastfeed to help them get to sleep. However, eat, activity, sleep is a really excellent guideline, meaning when they wake up, you introduce food, either the breast or if you're bottle feeding them, then there's a little activity, little playtime, little hangout time, and as they get older and older and older, the activity time naturally just gets longer and longer. And then they go to sleep. So eat, activity, sleep. And it's nice to have a consistent format because it's going to help them to feel secure. Why? Because if one day you wake up and it's playtime and then you introduce food after, and then the next day they wake up and then it's food right away and then it's playtime and it's changing from day to day and you can't decide, or this works for you this day, that works for you that day. Your kid is going to be like, hey, do I wake up and get food? Is it playtime? Is it this? So much of their safety and security and feeling like their needs are being met is this consistency, right? And how you're managing them and they can rely on you to get their needs met. So a good guideline, even before there's any kind of stringent schedule or you're really okay, we want to spread out the feedings, eat, activity, sleep is a really nice schedule, a really nice guideline for you to use because it's add some consistency. So even if you're not sure, you're nervous, your baby doesn't know any of that. They just know, oh, whenever I wake up, they introduce food to me, then there's an activity, and then they go back to sleep. And it's a consistent little schedule, okay? Works really nicely, and it's a good guideline until you decide to start spreading out the feedings. Now let's talk about feeding cues. Your baby does normally wake up looking for food, especially in the first couple of weeks, right? They're as an organism, they're all about survival, and they need this nutrients to survive. So they're going to be looking for the nutrients. With that being said, if you're watching your baby as they're coming out of their sleep cycle, right, about every 2 hours-ish, they're going to start showing you signs and feeding cues even before they wake up. So even towards the end of their sleep cycle, they're going to start to be moving more, okay, and stretching and turning their head. These are all early signs that your baby's starting to come through, that they're getting hungry, and they're starting to, they're going to wake up soon, and they're going to be looking for food, okay? The next set is they're going to be stretching more and turning their head, and then they're going to start sucking on their hand, okay? That means, right, these are early cues. They're looking for food. They're looking for this nutrients. They're life-sustaining nutrients so they can survive. After they got to that stage, then they're going to start to cry, which is their only way of saying, hey, dude, I'm hungry, I need some life-sustaining nutrients. So crying is actually a late stage cue, and that also means to you and me that we need to soothe them before they eat, right? They're not going to go from, I'm so hungry, to, oh, yay, a bottle, I'm great, I'm so excited about that, or a breast. Late cues, that means you need to soothe them first. Oh, Daddy loves you, I'm sorry, I missed your cues, baby, everything's going to be good. Touching them. They can't get enough physical touch, loving touch, being close, skin on skin. Again, they can't get enough of that. Okay, everything's fine, baby. Your daddy loves you. Daddy loves you. Your milk is heating, baby. Okay, your daddy loves you. Your daddy loves you. Everything's good. Okay, so you want to soothe them. Crying is a late sign. All right. So with that being said, those are the cues, right? And if you're in touch with what's going on, you could catch them early, right? Which is amazing. So one of the best ways to catch them early, and putting together some different perspectives from the birthing community, from the sleep study community, from maternal sleep study. I mean, there's all these different groups that do all this studying. From those perspectives, I'm going to share with you what I think is going to be the single best way to be able to, number one, identify the cues early and get the most sleep possible. So everyone, the powers that be, all recommend that your baby sleeps in your room with you for at least a year, right? That's like most common guidelines. That's not my perspective, although that is guidelines out there. And again, you're the one who's going to be in your home and your family and figure out what's best for you. However, in the very beginning, at least the first couple of months until they sleep through the night, we had our babies in our room until they started sleeping through the night. Because we found that we slept better when they were out of the room. And again, so much of that comes down to your comfort level. And yes, we're going to talk about here in a second, being able to identify their feeding cues early. It seems to me that the single best way to get the most sleep possible is the combination of your woman breastfeeding and having your baby in a co-sleeper, okay? Or it's called a sidecar. So look, any kind of apparatus that your kid sleeps with, you want it to be in the room with you, super close. You're going to be up through the night. So having your baby in the room with you just makes sense. to make things as smooth and quick as possible to eliminate as much lag time of satisfying your baby's needs, right? Taking care of their needs of survival as quick as possible. And with our first kid, we had a bassinet in there and it was super next to the bed. And then we discovered this sidecar. And then also through this 16 years of studying and learning and all of it, it just makes sense that this sidecar is probably, I think, makes the most sense to get the most sleep, right? So everyone agrees you don't want your baby sleeping in bed with you, including me, for a lot of different reasons. Rolling over on them, teaching them that that's their place. It's nice when everyone has their own place. So this little sidecar is essentially a 3-sided pack and play, and it's tethered to the bed, and it's at the same level as your mattress. So your baby has its own space. It's right there next to mama, and how it ties in with getting sleep and these early cues, okay, is that let's just say the example of your baby being in a separate sleeping apparatus, right? So either a pack and play, a bassinet, whatever you got that your baby's sleeping in, okay? Your drawer, okay, with a blanket, wherever your kid is sleeping. Let's just imagine they're over here, even close to the bed, but not in this, same level mattress situation. It's in the middle of the night. Either your woman or you, it's time to feed the baby, okay? Your woman is super cozy, exhausted, tired, sleeping in bed. Your baby starts to cry because if it's over there, it's not as easy to pick up these early feeding cues, right? So your woman has to get up out of bed, go over there. Your baby's crying, unswaddle it, bring it over, soothe it, and then bring it to the breast and finally get to the feeding process. That's kind of that situation versus imagine your baby is right next to your woman, okay? And I'm here to share with you, if they're in close proximity and she's breastfeeding, your baby's feeding cues and your woman's instincts, they're right next to each other. The women that use this system, the families that kind of see the wisdom in having the baby right there, especially if they're breastfeeding, okay? And even if you're bottle feeding, if the baby's right next to the bed, they're instinctually, infants are instinctually, as they're going to start moving, and look, from what the most common best practices for sleeping baby, and I use the Safe Sleep 7 as a guideline, which was developed by the La Leche League, and I'll put a link here, okay, for the Safe Sleep 7. Having a safe sleep, environment, your baby instinctually is going to start waking being lightly dressed, okay, not swaddled, but lightly dressed right next to you guys in the bed, so they can move their hands. Just imagine how much more pissed off they'll be if they're locked in and they can't start doing the cues. So per the Safe Sleep 7, they're lightly dressed right next to mama. They start stretching and moving, and instinctually they're going to be reaching, and if your woman's right next to her, and the Safe Sleep 7 is kind of on her side with her knees up, which would prevent her from rolling at all, okay? Because if you're kind of in the fetal position and your knees are bent, you're not rolling anywhere, okay? You can't. And your baby kind of gets right into that little nook, right? So mama instinctually pulls the baby closer. The baby latches on her breast, or even before that, the baby starts, doing the feeding cues and mama brings her in. And then even if mama rolls the baby in the middle, you change the diaper, then mama pulls the baby over, feeds the baby, okay? And then puts her right back in that little sidecar piece. Talk to a midwife or pediatrician, sometimes through the night, when in the best possible healthy scenario with the latching on and goes smoothly, your woman won't even remember how many times she fed the baby because it's this natural thing that just happens. The baby stretches, is looking for the boob, mama brings her in, you change the diaper. Again, think about the sleep cycle and how much smoother that is than your baby being over there, wrapped up in a tight swaddle. And look, our first kid, we swaddled them, we put them in the thing because my consciousness, I didn't know this stuff, right? This is the behind the scenes stuff, right? This is probably best practices for the most sleep possible. And even if it's a formula fed and no breast, the baby's right there. They get the signals, your woman still is the signals, brings them over, and then you can give the baby the bottle. And then the same process, change the diaper, give them the bottle, and then back to sleep, right? Again, coming from that makes sense, right? Having them super close, being able to pick up the signs sooner. This is what it just makes sense is the smoothest, best possible way that you guys are going to get the most sleep possible. This sidecar, so you could pick up the early signs, lightly dressed, safe, the sheets are pulled taut, and this is all part of the Safe Sleep 7, sober parents, sober, responsible parents, so you can pick up the baby's cues sooner. And again, like from hearing all this and putting it together, it just makes the most sense rather than a swaddled up baby over there. The lightly dressed baby, they can do their cues, they can feel safe to move around, bring them close in, feed them, they roll off back to sleep. That just seems to make the most sense possible. Okay, so I'm thinking that made some good sense. And listen, it's a personal matter, the nighttime sleeping situation, what you guys are going to feel comfortable with. Coming from a perspective of preserving mommy-daddy time and your relationship, and then thinking forward to, introducing intimacy again into your world, it is definitely advisable not to have the baby in the bed with you, right? Because they're a little learning organism. So they learn that their spot is in the center. When you do come to the time where you want to move them, they'll be like, yo, man, what's up? This is my spot. You taught me this was my spot. So from that perspective, having them right next to the bed but not in your bed is amazing. And I do want to also connect with you a little bit more about this Safe Sleep 7 situation because, out in the world, there's a lot of, again, you're hearing this from me. There's a lot of different perspectives and everything, about feeding and sleeping at night. And one recommendation that a lot of folks get is that they're not supposed to, that your woman, are not supposed to feed the baby in bed, right? Or sleep with the baby in bed. Which causes kind of like if you're not supposed to feed the baby in bed, right? So it's the middle of the night and your woman is exhausted, you're exhausted, and where do you feed the baby and sleep with the baby if not in the bed? So a lot of this goes into talking about smothering and, this kind of issues with the infants, SIDS and sudden infant death syndrome. When you start looking, sudden infant death syndrome, a lot of these cases are, they're more rare than you might want to, than the media really promotes, okay? Because again, it's a lot of fear. Now, a lot of the smothering happens really when women, number one, a lot of all infant fatalities come from inebriated parents, okay? When you start doing some real research and you get behind the scenes and you're talking to the people who actually know the numbers and study the numbers, most infant fatalities come from inebriated parents, okay? Not sober, conscious, healthy people looking to manage their baby and get the most sleep possible, right? So you take relatively unconscious people who are also inebriated, and they hear, don't feed the baby or sleep with the baby near the bed. So they get up, they're exhausted, they go to the couch or the lazy boy or the sofa, which is fluffy, and they feed the baby, right? Because they weren't supposed to be in the bed, and they fall off and the baby rolls and gets suffocated in the couch. That's how a lot of infant fatalities happen, okay? These are not, again, super conscious, sober individuals with a safe sleep environment, and their, sheets are pulled tight, and the baby's in this co-sleeper next to them, so they're not in the bed, they're next to the bed. You see what I'm saying? So if there are high odds that you are a conscious person who is not going to be getting drunk or, drugged up while you're managing the infant, the odds of those things go way down. And then it turns out that, maybe in the middle of the night, the safest, best place to feed your baby is this super easy reading the signs. Your baby's reaching out for the breast. If you pull them in, they eat, and then they go back to their safe little environment there. Just makes sense. Just makes sense. So again, it also just makes total sense. Even if she's not breastfeeding and you're bottle feeding the baby with formula, it just seems that right next to you, again, lightly dressed, nothing in the pack and play, no loose blankets, no fluffy stuff. It's a safe, the pack and play thing, the sidecar, tight sheets, nothing in there except the baby. Your baby's loosely dressed, so their temperature is nice and cool like you are. Just kind of, they don't need to be all hot and snuggled in. They're just a little being, okay? Lightly dressed, so they can move around at night, do their cues, where then mama can reach over and feed the baby, all right? You're gonna find your way. I hope this was helpful. I hope that made sense to you. Keeping them close and then getting the most sleep possible, because you could read the cues earlier. It made the most sense to me, and that's clearly why I'm sharing that with you, and I hope that made the most sense to you. So right now, my friend, we have just come to the end of the feeding section, okay? So you are now in possession of all that you need to know to check off the first two big categories of managing your infant's needs. How to change the baby like a hero, okay, and also how to support your woman through breastfeeding, engorged breast, helping her out, supporting her, the actual task of feeding your baby, and also some insight into perhaps some methods to get the most sleep possible for you. Next, I'm so excited to talk to you about the third and super key, they're all key, but even really amazing tools for you to know how to soothe your baby, which is going to help you to feel so empowered. I'm thrilled and excited to share these next tools with you.